"Watch out, old man!" The motorcycle swerved, tires screeching against asphalt, but it was too late. The impact sent Harold Winters sprawling across the crosswalk, his groceries scattering, apples rolling into the gutter. The young rider skidded to a stop, yanking off his helmet. "What the hell, Gramps? You can't just wander into the street." Harold tried to push himself up, wincing as pain shot through his hip. Blood trickled from his elbow, staining his worn flannel shirt. "I had the light," he said quietly, his voice nearly lost in the growing crowd. The motorcyclist, tattoos climbing his neck, laughed coldly. "Yeah, sure. You probably can't even see the lights anymore." Someone in the gathering crowd snickered. Another raised a phone, recording. "Grandpa got wrecked," a voice called out. More laughter rippled through the onlookers. Harold's fingers curled around his walking cane, now cracked from the fall. With painful dignity, he pulled himself to his knees, blood dripping onto the crosswalk beneath him. "My groceries," he murmured, reaching for smashed eggs. "Leave it, old-timer," the motorcyclist said, checking his bike for damage. "Just be glad I didn't total my ride because of you." Cars honked impatiently. No one stepped forward to help. Harold's shoulders slumped slightly, not in defeat, but in a resignation born from years of being overlooked. That's when the rumble started. Low at first, then growing louder. 3 military Humvees appeared at the intersection, moving in formation. They stopped abruptly, blocking traffic. 6 soldiers in combat uniforms emerged, boots hitting the pavement in synchronized thuds. The crowd fell silent, and the young captain leading them froze when he saw the old man kneeling in the street. His face drained of color as recognition flickered across his features. "Dear God," he whispered, "it's him." His name was Harold Montgomery Winters, and in 1981, during the coldest winter Afghanistan had seen in decades, he crawled through half a mile of enemy fire with nothing but a medical kit and sheer determination to reach 7 wounded soldiers trapped behind a collapsed stone wall. Captain Benjamin Lawson stood motionless at the edge of the crowd, memories flooding back with physical force. The same weathered face, now streaked with blood and humiliation. The same quiet strength in those shoulders, even as they trembled from the impact. "Clear a path," Benjamin ordered, his voice carrying the weight of command. The other soldiers formed a protective semicircle around Harold without hesitation. The motorcyclist, Derek Vaughan according to his license plate, stepped back, suddenly uncertain. "Hey man, what's the big deal?" The old guy walked right. "Shut your mouth," one of the soldiers hissed. Benjamin knelt beside Harold, gently placing a hand on the older man's shoulder. "Sir," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "do you remember Outpost Echo, Kandahar Province, February 19th, 1981? Harold looked up slowly, his pale blue eyes focusing through the pain. Recognition dawned gradually, then all at once. "Lieutenant Lawson," he said quietly, "you made captain." Benjamin nodded, fighting to keep his composure. "Because of you, sir. Because I lived long enough to make captain." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. The phones recording the scene didn't lower, but something in the atmosphere had changed. The mockery had evaporated, replaced by a confusion no one dared voice. Benjamin turned to his men. "This is Combat Medic Harold Winters, 5th Special Forces Group, the man who pulled 7 of us from certain death during Operation Winter Veil." Harold shook his head slightly. "It was just 6. Corporal Hayes didn't make it." "No, sir," Benjamin corrected gently. "Hayes survived. You carried him 13 miles to the extraction point with a bullet in your own leg. He made it home, had 3 children. His daughter serves with us now." A tremor passed through Harold's hand as he reached for his walking cane. "I didn't know," he whispered. One of the soldiers stepped forward, her features a younger reflection of the man Harold had saved decades ago. "Sergeant Alicia Hayes, sir. My father told me stories about you my entire life." Benjamin helped Harold to his feet, while the other soldiers gathered his scattered groceries with the reverence of an honor guard collecting a fallen flag. "When the wall collapsed," Benjamin continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent street, "we were certain we'd die there. 6 wounded, no communication, enemy fire from 3 directions. Then this man appeared, crawling through the rocks, his medical kit tied to his back." Harold lowered his eyes. "Anyone would have—" "No," Benjamin cut in firmly. "They wouldn't have, and they didn't." The young motorcyclist shifted his weight, uncomfortable now. "Look, I didn't know he saved 17 lives that day," Benjamin continued as if Derek hadn't spoken. "Not just ours. After evacuating us, he returned for a family trapped in a collapsed building nearby, an Afghan mother and her 4 children. He treated their wounds under artillery fire, then carried the youngest child 3 miles to safety. Benjamin turned to face the crowd directly, his uniform pristine against the backdrop of the dirty street. After his service, Harold Winters didn't just disappear into retirement. He created the Winter Mercy Foundation, training combat medics and emergency responders in advanced field techniques. His protocols have saved over 1,200 lives in conflict zones across the world. Harold's gaze remained fixed on the cracked pavement. "It wasn't just me," he murmured. "I had help." Benjamin smiled slightly. "That's what he always says. The truth is, every life he saved became a ripple. I used his techniques to save 4 more soldiers in Iraq. Those soldiers saved others. The ripples never stopped." The crowd had grown larger now, silent and attentive. The motorcyclist's arrogant posture had collapsed into something smaller, uncertain. "And yet," Benjamin said, his voice hardening, "this man walks home alone with his groceries, gets struck down in the street, and not one person steps forward to help him up." Every Tuesday and Friday, Harold Winters walked the same route to Milgram's Market. The same worn brown jacket, the same careful steps, the same polite nod to anyone who happened to meet his eye, though fewer and fewer did as the years passed. He never drove, not since his return from overseas. Something about backfiring engines sent him somewhere dark. Most days, Harold was invisible, just another old man shuffling through a world that moved too fast and had forgotten how to see what mattered. His small house contained no medals on display, no shadow boxes of commendations. The only evidence of his service was a single black and white photograph beside his bed. 6 young men crowded together, mountains rising behind them. 5 of those men had returned home because of him, though the picture never told that story. Once a month, a courier delivered a small package to Harold's doorstep. Inside would be handwritten letters from field medics around the world, occasionally accompanied by a simple gift: coffee from Yemen, tea from Pakistan, once a hand-carved wooden box from a village elder in northern Afghanistan. Harold kept every letter in a weathered footlocker beneath his bed, reading them on nights when sleep refused to come. Last Christmas, he'd received a letter from a young medic stationed at the same outpost where he'd once crawled through gunfire to reach the wounded. "Your techniques saved 4 Marines yesterday," the letter read. "They don't know your name, but I do." Harold had read it 17 times, then carefully placed it with the others, telling no one. Now, as Harold stood surrounded by soldiers on that busy street corner, the depth of his invisibility became painfully apparent to everyone watching. "He lives 3 blocks from here," Benjamin said, gesturing down Cedar Avenue. "Walks past that coffee shop every Tuesday and Friday, past the fire station where 2 volunteers were trained using his combat medical protocols, past the high school where his foundation sponsored 3 scholarships last year." A woman stepped forward from the crowd, phone lowered now, recognition dawning on her face. "You're the man who leaves books at the Veterans Center," she said softly. "Medical textbooks, with notes in the margins." Harold nodded once, uncomfortable with the attention. "They needed updated materials. Those books saved my brother's life," she continued. "He's a field medic. He recognized a tension pneumothorax because of your handwritten notes. His commanding officer said he'd never seen a rookie catch it so fast." Harold's eyes flickered up briefly, then back to the ground. "I'm glad," he said simply. From another direction, an older man pushed through the crowd. "You paid for my grandson's surgery," he said, voice cracking slightly, "after the insurance denied it. The hospital said an anonymous donor covered everything." "There must be some mistake," Harold murmured, though his eyes told a different story. The young motorcyclist, Derek, had backed his bike against the curb, his earlier bravado evaporating. "Look, I didn't know—" "Of course you didn't know," Benjamin cut in, voice sharp as steel. "Because men like Harold don't wear their valor like billboards. They don't demand recognition. They just continue serving long after the uniforms come off." A police cruiser pulled up, lights flashing, but sirens silent. 2 officers approached cautiously. "We received calls about an accident," the first officer began. Benjamin nodded. "This young man," he gestured to Derek, "struck a pedestrian in the crosswalk and failed to render aid." Derek stepped forward, protesting. "He walked right out. He wasn't looking. I had the right of—" "I witnessed the entire incident, officer," came a new voice. A woman in a business suit stepped forward. "The pedestrian had the walk signal. The motorcycle ran the red light. I have it on my dashboard camera." The officer turned to Derek. "Sir, I need to see your license and registration." As Derek fumbled for his wallet, the officer leaned closer, then straightened. "Sir, have you been drinking?" The young man's face flushed. "Just 1 beer with lunch. It's not—" I can smell it from here, the officer said. I'll need you to perform a field sobriety test. While the police handled Derek, Benjamin turned back to Harold, who stood watching the scene with quiet detachment. Let us take you to the hospital, sir, Benjamin said gently. Harold shook his head. It's just a scrape, I've had worse. At least let us drive you home. Harold hesitated, then nodded once. As the soldiers led him toward one of the Humvees, he stopped suddenly, turning back toward his scattered groceries. My eggs, he said softly. We'll get you more, sir, Sergeant Hayes assured him. Harold looked at her, really looked, seeing the features of her father in her determined jaw. Your father? He said quietly. How is he? Alive because of you, she answered simply. He never let us forget it. As they helped Harold into the vehicle, a young boy broke away from his mother's grip and ran forward. Mister, he called out, are you a superhero? The crowd had fallen completely silent, awaiting Harold's response. Harold looked at the child, then at the faces watching him. Some embarrassed, some curious, some moved to tears. His voice, when it finally came, carried clearly across the hushed street. No, son, he said, just a medic who never learned when to quit. The Humvee turned slowly onto Maple Street, a military vehicle looking strangely out of place among the modest homes. Harold sat straight-backed in the passenger seat, his weathered hands resting on his knees, saying nothing as they approached his small white house. What no one expected was the crowd that had already gathered there. Word travels quickly in small towns. By the time the military convoy reached Harold's home, nearly 30 people lined the sidewalk. Neighbors who had lived beside him for years without really seeing him. The librarian who had always wondered about the quiet man who borrowed medical journals. The teenager who mowed his lawn each summer. What's all this? Harold asked, voice barely audible. Benjamin smiled slightly. News travels fast, sir. As the vehicle stopped, Harold noticed something that made his breath catch. The crowd wasn't just standing there. Each person held something in their hands. Some clutched handwritten cards. Others held small American flags. An elderly woman near the front wept quietly, holding a framed photograph. Benjamin helped Harold from the vehicle. The cut on his elbow had stopped bleeding, but his movements were stiff, pain evident in the tightness around his eyes. A path cleared through the gathered neighbors. At the front of Harold's modest porch stood Police Chief Robert Gaines, his expression solemn and respectful. Mr. Winters, the chief said, stepping forward, on behalf of the department, I want to extend my deepest apologies for the incident today. Harold shook his head slightly. Not necessary. It is, the chief insisted. The young man has been arrested, DUI and reckless endangerment. But that's not why I'm here. He paused, emotion flickering across his professional demeanor. My nephew serves in the 10th Mountain Division. Last year his unit was hit outside Kandahar. 3 critical injuries. The chief's voice wavered slightly. The medic who saved them used a technique they called the Winters method. I never made the connection until today. Harold's eyes widened slightly, then dropped back to the ground. It's just a simple modification to standard field procedures, nothing special. It saved my nephew's life, the chief said simply. From the crowd, the elderly woman with the photograph stepped forward. Her hands trembled as she turned the frame toward Harold. You won't remember me, she said, her voice thin with age. But I remember you. Kabul, 1982. My husband was stationed at the embassy when the bombing happened. Harold stared at the photograph, a much younger version of himself kneeling beside a wounded man, hands steady amid the chaos, dust and debris coating both their faces. John, Harold whispered. John Mercer. The woman's eyes filled with tears. He lived another 30 years because of you, long enough to see his grandchildren. She pressed the photograph into Harold's hands. We tried to find you, to thank you. You disappeared after the evacuation. I was just doing my job, Harold said softly. No, Benjamin interrupted, his voice carrying to everyone present. You went far beyond your job. He turned to address the gathered crowd. What most people don't know about Harold Winters is that after the incident at Outpost Echo, after saving our unit, after evacuating the Afghan family, he returned a 3rd time. Harold shook his head slightly. Ben, don't. The Taliban had captured 3 aid workers, Benjamin continued. Harold went in alone. No backup, no extraction plan. He not only treated their wounds, but led them 17 miles through mountain passes in the dead of night to reach safety. A murmur passed through the crowd. For that action, Benjamin said, Harold Winters was awarded the Silver Star, a commendation he refused to accept publicly. Harold's jaw tightened. Those aid workers were the heroes. I just helped them get home. Benjamin turned to face Harold directly. "Sir, with respect, it's time people knew. You've hidden long enough." From inside the second Humvee, a man emerged, older than Benjamin but younger than Harold, dressed in an impeccable army dress uniform adorned with the insignia of a full colonel. "Dr. Winters," the colonel said, approaching with measured steps. "I'm Colonel James Harrison, current director of the Combat Medical Training Division." Harold nodded once in acknowledgement. "Every combat medic in today's army trains using your field techniques," the colonel continued. "The Winters protocol for tension pneumothorax alone has saved over 300 lives in the past decade." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "This should have been presented to you years ago." Harold didn't reach for it. "I never wanted recognition." "I know," the colonel said. "That's precisely why you deserve it. And for those who believe that true heroes rarely wear capes, but sometimes wear scars no one sees, this channel continues to uncover these hidden stories of quiet courage. Subscribe to Humble Stories and discover more tales that remind us to look deeper, recognize valor in its many forms, and remember that the most profound heroes are often standing right beside us in the grocery line. 3 days after the incident, Harold Winters sat on his front porch, a cup of coffee cooling beside him. The morning paper lay folded on his lap, unopened. His neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, had already called twice to tell him his story was on the front page. "Local hero finally recognized," the headline declared above a photograph of Harold standing beside Captain Benjamin Lawson, both looking slightly uncomfortable with the attention. The street before his house had been unusually busy since that day. Cars drove by slowly, sometimes stopping as passengers peered curiously at the modest white house. Harold had taken to sitting on his back porch instead, away from the curious eyes, but this morning felt different. A police cruiser pulled up to the curb. Chief Gaines stepped out, carrying a manila folder. "Morning, Mr. Winters," he called, approaching the porch steps. Harold nodded in greeting. "Chief, mind if I join you?" Harold gestured to the empty chair beside him. The chief sat, placing the folder on the small table between them. "The DA is pressing charges against Derek Vaughan. DUI, reckless endangerment, leaving the scene of an accident." Harold's expression remained neutral. "The boy made a mistake." "Several," the chief corrected. "And not his first. 3 prior speeding tickets, 1 prior DUI that got pleaded down." He paused. "He could face serious jail time." Harold was quiet for a long moment. "What if I don't want to press charges?" The chief looked at him sharply. "After what he did? After how he treated you?" "He's young," Harold said simply. "Young people make mistakes. Some mistakes deserve consequences." Harold's weathered hands folded in his lap. "What if there was another way, something more useful than jail time?" "What did you have in mind?" Harold turned to face the chief directly. "Community service at the VA hospital. Let him see what service actually means." The chief considered this, then slowly nodded. "I might be able to arrange something." He hesitated. "You're a better man than most, Winters." Harold shrugged slightly. "I've seen what happens when punishment becomes the only path forward. Nobody heals." As the chief prepared to leave, a black SUV pulled up behind his cruiser. Benjamin Lawson emerged, now dressed in civilian clothes, followed by Colonel Harrison and, surprisingly, Corporal Hayes. "Looks like you've got company," the chief said, standing. "I'll let you know what the DA decides." As the chief departed, Benjamin approached, carrying a large cardboard box. "Morning, sir," he called. "Hope we're not interrupting." Harold gestured welcomingly. "Coffee's still hot." The men settled on the porch, Hayes taking the chair nearest Harold. "Still can't believe I found you," he said, shaking his head. "All these years." "How did you?" Harold asked, genuinely curious. Benjamin smiled slightly. "My unit was conducting training at Fort Benning. We were demonstrating the Winters protocol when this old-timer in the back stood up and said, 'That's not how Hal showed me.' Nearly gave me a heart attack." Hayes chuckled. "Took this young captain about 10 seconds to put it together. Another day to track down your address. We would have come sooner," Benjamin added, "but we needed to collect a few things first." He gestured to the box he had brought. Colonel Harrison leaned forward. "Dr. Winters, your protocols aren't just saving lives in American units. They've been adopted by NATO forces, by humanitarian organizations working in conflict zones, even by several national emergency response systems." Harold shifted uncomfortably. "They're just modifications to existing techniques." "Modifications that work," Harrison insisted. He nodded toward the box. "That's what we wanted to show you." Benjamin opened the cardboard container and began removing items one by one. Letters, hundreds of them. bound with rubber bands, photographs of medical teams in desert camouflage, a worn field manual with handwritten notes in the margins. "These are from medics around the world," Benjamin explained. "People who've used your techniques. People who wanted to thank you but never knew how to find you." Harold stared at the growing pile of correspondence. "I don't understand. How did they even know my name?" "We call it the Winters Protocol, in your honor," Harrison explained. "Every combat medic learns your name during training." Harold reached for one of the photographs with trembling fingers. It showed a dusty medical tent in what appeared to be Afghanistan. A handwritten note on the back read, "Winter's method saved 4 today. Thank you from all of us." As they sat in companionable silence, a battered pickup truck stopped across the street. Derek Vaughan stepped out, looking considerably less cocky than he had days before. His arm was in a cast, an injury from being taken down by police after failing his sobriety test. He approached the porch hesitantly, stopping at the bottom step. "Mr. Winters?" he said, voice uncertain. Harold regarded him steadily. "Yes? Derek swallowed hard. "I came to apologize. For what happened. For what I said." Harold said nothing, waiting. "My mom saw your story in the paper," Derek continued. "She recognized your name right away." He paused, visibly struggling. "My uncle was a Marine. Afghanistan, 2010. He came home because a medic used something called the Winters method after their convoy hit an IED. Harold's expression softened slightly. "I didn't know," Derek said, his voice cracking. "I didn't know it was you, that you were who you are." "And if I wasn't?" Harold asked quietly. "If I was just an old man crossing the street, would that make what you did acceptable?" Derek looked down, shame evident in his posture. "No, sir, it wouldn't." He hesitated. "The police chief said you were asking for community service instead of jail time. After everything I did, why would you do that?" Harold considered the young man for a long moment. "Because punishment is easy, redemption is harder and more valuable." 6 months passed. The seasons turned. Summer heat giving way to autumn chill, leaves changing and falling in Harold's small yard. The story that had briefly made him a local celebrity had faded from headlines, allowing his life to settle back into familiar rhythms. But things weren't quite the same. On Tuesday mornings, Harold still walked to Milgram's Market, still bought his eggs and bread and coffee. But now, people nodded as he passed. Not the exaggerated deference of those first awkward weeks, but simple acknowledgement, one neighbor to another. At the VA hospital where he volunteered 3 days a week, the staff had added a small plaque outside the emergency training room, Winters Protocol Training Center. Harold had protested, but Dr. Reeves, the chief of medicine, had been insistent. "It's not for you," she told him. "It's for the young medics who need to understand that what they're learning matters." And twice a month, Harold found himself supervising Derek Vaughan's community service hours. The young man had started out sullen, resentful of the mandatory volunteer work. But something had changed after his 3rd session, after he'd helped a young veteran learn to navigate a wheelchair with one arm. "I never understood," Derek had confessed to Harold one afternoon, "what it actually means to serve." Today was different, though. Harold sat on a bench outside the VA hospital, watching autumn leaves spiral down onto the walkway. Inside, Derek was completing his final hours of community service, though he had already signed up to continue volunteering weekly. A car pulled into the parking lot, and Benjamin Lawson stepped out, now in civilian clothes. He spotted Harold and walked over, settling beside him on the bench. "How's our project coming along?" Benjamin asked. Harold smiled slightly. "The first kits ship out next week. 25 of them headed to field hospitals in Syria." After the incident, Harold's Winter Mercy Foundation had received an unexpected influx of donations, enough to fund an entire year of emergency field kits, compact medical supplies designed specifically for combat zones with limited resources. "And, Derek?" Benjamin asked. Harold glanced toward the hospital entrance. "He's designing a training manual, simple illustrations, step-by-step instructions. His idea." Pride flickered briefly across Harold's weathered features. "Says he wants to make sure nobody misses saving a life because they couldn't understand the technical language." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the wind stir the fallen leaves. "You know," Benjamin said finally, "I used to wonder why you disappeared after Afghanistan, why you never claimed your commendations, never stayed in touch." Harold looked at him sideways. "And now?" "Now I think maybe you were the wisest of all of us," Benjamin said. "You understood that the work itself was what mattered, not the recognition." Harold nodded slowly. "There's dignity in quiet service, Ben. Always has been. As they spoke, a school bus pulled up to the curb. Children poured out, followed by 2 teachers. The Winter Mercy Foundation's newest initiative, bringing students to learn basic emergency response techniques from veterans. Harold watched as Derek emerged from the hospital, immediately surrounded by eager children asking questions. The once arrogant young man now knelt to their level, explaining with surprising patience how to check a pulse, how to apply pressure to a wound. "You see that?" Harold said softly. "That's the ripple effect. That's what matters." Benjamin followed his gaze. "One life touches another, and none of it needs applause," Harold finished. As the afternoon light began to fade, Harold rose slowly from the bench. "Time to head home." "Need a ride?" Benjamin offered. Harold shook his head. "I'll walk, always have." Benjamin watched as the old man set off down the sidewalk, his gait still slightly uneven from the accident, but his shoulders straight, his head high. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today, someone isn't going hungry, someone is breathing easier, someone is walking taller because of a hand extended in silence. If this story moved you, subscribe to Humble Stories, where the extraordinary lives in ordinary people are finally given voice. There's something profound about people like Harold Winters, men and women who serve not for recognition, but because service itself is the reward. We live in a world obsessed with visibility, with likes and shares and trending topics, but the most meaningful impacts often happen in silence, in moments no camera captures. How many Harold Winters have you passed on the street? How many quiet heroes have you overlooked because they didn't announce their presence? If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about the invisible heroes in your own community, subscribe and join us. There are more stories to tell, more quiet acts of heroism to recognize. Leave a comment below, tell us about someone you know who serves without seeking recognition. And if this channel has become a place where you find meaning, subscribe and activate notifications. Because as long as there are humble people doing extraordinary things in silence, we'll be here to tell their stories.